chapter 4. From the death of Constantine the Great AD 337 to the First Crusade AD 1095. There's a poem there. And a Bible quote, scripture. There is among you envying and strife and divisions. 1 Corinthians 3:3. The history of Christianity from its adoption as a state religion of Rome to the Crusades belongs but indirectly to our subject, the author's subject. It may reasonably be doubted whether the change made in its favour from a proscribed to a prescribed faith was not upon the whole an injury to the church. The time of persecution for the name of Christ had indeed passed away, but the watchful enemy of man seized the moment when prosperity began to lull the church into security, to introduce errors destructive of all true faith, and which led to divisions and innumerable calamities unknown before. And this is referring to that Roman state Christian church, Catholic Church. Prosperity began to lull the church into security, to introduce errors destructive of all true faith, and which led to divisions and innumerable calamities unknown before. Teachers arose whose doctrines shook the new church to its centre. Arius, presbyter of Alexandria in Egypt, opened a controversy, AD 315, which kept the church in turmoil for 50 years. Eusebius of Nicomedia, AD 341, Photinus, Apollinaris, Pelagius, AD 412, and others founded new sects. It is not our part, the author's part, to say upon what basis of truth, but the consequences were envying, strife, and divisions. Of these, the historian Gibbon has made the best use, and thus the reader is referred to his pages for full accounts. Yet the church continued to expand among the heathen, or the pagans. Ethiopia was converted by Frumentius, who was consecrated first bishop of the Ethiopians by Athanasius. Iberia, Thracia, Moesia, and Dacia received the light of the gospel. Martin, bishop of Tours, completed the conversion of the Gauls, and all this before the close of the 4th century. Thus did the grain of mustard seed sown by Christ continue to extend into a great tree. In the 5th century, Arabia and Ireland acknowledged the Christian faith. Clovis, the founder of the French monarchy, was baptized AD 496. In the 6th century, St. Augustine and others preached the gospel with great power and founded several Christian churches in Britain, and at the beginning of the period of which the author's volume mainly treats, that of Knight Templar, the story of the cross, had been effectually promulgated in every part of the civilized world. To set the doctrines of Christ and his apostles in forcible contrast with the errors that were being disseminated on every hand, 8 general ecumenical councils were held prior to the period of the Crusades, of which the authors insert the list. Omitting the conference of elders, etc., described in Acts 15, held at Jerusalem AD 50, the following gives times and places with sufficient detail. 1. At Nice, or Nicaea, in Bithynia, Asia Minor, AD 325. Over this council Constantine the Great presided, condemned the Arian theory, composed the Nicene Creed, and decreed that Jesus was very God and very man. So he's both divine and man. Yes, hypostasis. And this is what Nestorius got persecuted over by Cyril, called a heretic, etc., etc., because he wanted to be the bishop of bishops, but he realised that Nestorius would be. So he created all these lies, accusations, etc., through them at him. The same year, a lesser council was held at Tyre. Various others of this class were held at different times and places. 2. At Constantinople, May to July AD 381. Summoned by the Emperor Theodosius, Pope Damascus presided, 350 bishops in attendance. 3. At Ephesus in Asia Minor, June 22 to July 31, AD 431. Pope Celestine presided. The Pelagian theory was condemned, 200 bishops in attendance. So these are all being persecuted as heretics, etc. 4. At Chalcedon, opposite Constantinople, October 8, AD 451. The Emperor Marcian and his Empress in attendance. The doctrines of Dioscorus and Eutychus censored. 630 bishops in attendance. 5 at Constantinople, May 4 to June 2, AD 553. Summoned by the Emperor Justinian, Pope Vigilius presided, pronounced judgment against Oregon, and so forth. A special council was convened at Clermont, France by Pope Urban II, AD 1095, at which the First Crusade was decided upon, 310 bishops in attendance. It is important to bear in mind here that the decisions of these ecumenical councils was not so much the right or wrong of a doctrine per se as a testimony whether the Holy Scriptures approved or disapproved it. The theory of a Grand Lodge is much the same. Its decisions are, or ought to be, references to ancient landmarks, written or unwritten, and in point of fact they are obligatory only so far as they are so referred. A bishop in any of those ancient churches was in spirit obligated as a Masonic past master that no man or body of men should make innovations in the body of Christ. The rise of Mohammedanism belongs to the present chapter. As the argument of Knight Templar was Jesus versus Muhammad, one grand merit of the great military order of the Middle Ages is that they presented a bulwark against the Muslim, or the Mohammedan. There was a day, October 10, AD 732, says Creasy in his 15 decisive battles, when the arm of Charles Martel saved and delivered the Christian nations of the West from the deadly grasp of all-destroying Islam, or Mohammedanism. And the historian Arnold ranks that victory among those signal deliverances which have affected for centuries the happiness of mankind. Gibbon acknowledges the danger from which the world then escaped in his sneering observation that had not the Saracen conquest then been checked, perhaps the interpretation of the Quran would now be taught in the schools of Oxford in England, and whose pulpits might demonstrate to a circumcised people the morality and truth of the revelation of Muhammad. The Muslims, in such multitudes that no man could reckon them, met the nations of the north upon the battlefield of Tours. This foe stood firm as a wall and impenetrable as a zone of ice, and the Arabs were slain with the edge of the sword. The defeat was thorough, and Christendom, though disunited, was safe. Muhammad, the founder of the Islam or Mohammedan religion, was born at Mecca, a city of Arabia, AD 569. His lineage was honourable and illustrious, being derived from the powerful tribe of Quraysh. His father's name was Abdallah, his mother's Anima, or Enema. In the division of his father's estate, the youthful Muhammad received but 5 camels and a slave. At the age of 13, he accompanied a travelling caravan into Syria, where it is thought he gained his first knowledge of the Jewish scriptures. A few years after, he served as a soldier in the civil wars then agitating Arabia. Having made a second visit to Damascus and other parts of Syria as factor for the widow Khadijah, he rewarded his fidelity with the gift of her hand and fortune. This was AD 597, when he was 28 years of age. 8 children crowned this union. The next 12 years of his life were passed at Mecca in affluence and ease. He now meditated and matured the bold design of palming a new religion upon the world. The paganism of his native people on the one hand, and the corruptions that had crept into the Christian faith on the other, encouraged him to hope that a form of faith whose grand article should be the unity of God might liberate his countrymen from error and establish himself as the prophet of a new faith. He began to issue from time to time scraps of pretended revelation under the name of the Quran, from Qara, to read, or the book that ought to be read, and to give out his claim as a divine messenger. After years of deliberation, he ripened his plans and proceeded in a gradual and cautious manner to put them into execution. So any practicing Muslims out there, you may watch this video, you may see us come across this. We'd quite welcome you to refute it or say, yeah, that's what went down in our comments. That would really help us out there, give us more understanding of your particular organised religion or Islam. Okay, so Muhammad retired daily to a cave near Mecca for fasting, prayer and holy meditation. He broke first to his wife the solemn intelligence of his call, and she became a convert. Her cousin Waraka followed her example. His servant was the third. Abu Bakr, a man of powerful influence at Mecca, now professed the religion of Islam, consecration to God, or total will, submission of will to God. In 4 years he won 9 converts. He was then 44 years of age. In AD 611 he made the first public announcement of his call. 10 years elapsed when such an opposition arose that he fled northward some 70 miles to Medina, where his doctrines had been favourably received. This flight, called the Hijra, took place July 16, AD 622, in the 53rd year of Muhammad's age. It was adopted as the era of the new dispensation, and the Arabian chronology of the Crusades is always referred to it. At Medina, the fugitive became a king. An army devoted to his person and obedient to his will was soon formed. He now assumed the temporal and religious power and began that career of conquest which makes his history a counterpart in this respect of King David's. He became leader of the army, judge of the people, and pastor of the flock. He died of poison, June 7 AD 632, aged 63 years, having conquered in person or by deputies all Western Asia and much of Africa. So someone assassinated him? That's what it seems to hint at. He was poisoned. Abu Bakr took up the sword of conquest with the title of Caliph, successor. He was followed, AD 634, by Omar I, he by Othman, AD 644, by Ali, AD 655, by Hassan, AD 661. Persia was conquered in a single battle. During the reign of Omar, the Muslims destroyed 36,000 cities, towns and castles, and 4,000 temples of Christian, Magian and pagan faiths, and erected 1,400 works, including AD 637, the celebrated Is-Sakra, or Dome of the Rock, upon the ancient site of the Temple of Solomon. And again we're recommending, have a look at Roy Kasagandra's Rise of Islam, featured on YouTube, should be on YouTube, and how he was attitude-wise. Okay, he wasn't this nasty, horrible, evil, wicked killer, right? As many claimed that the Mohammedans were in those days. He's actually a very lovely man at that time. Very different from the Muslims of today, the possibly the caliphates and the extremists. Very, very different. Under the rule of Othman, the Mohammedan sway extended to the borders of India on the east, to northern Africa on the west, and to the islands of Cyprus. And from this time forward, for several centuries, the progress of the new faith was steady, often rapid. In the 8th century, the Muslim invaded Europe, conquered Spain, and had so nearly overrun France that nothing but the victory of Tours saved that kingdom. In the 15th century, Constantinople surrendered to the Sultan, Muhammad II, who made it his capital and the chief seat of his religion. At the present day, it is calculated that 200 million of souls are under the sway of the doctrines of Muhammad. And here is a picture depiction here. Kubit is Sakra, or Dome of the Rock, which still stands in Jerusalem today. Chapter 5. History of the Holy Land from the entrance of Abraham, BC 1921, to the period of the Crusades, AD 1905. That would be 921 BC, to the period of the Crusades, AD 1095. And there's a poem there. Among the early travellers to the Holy Land, whose narratives have been preserved in whole or in mutilated state, the authors have extant at the present day. They state at the present day the following: AD 333, a Christian traveller of Bordeaux, France, whose account is preserved under the title of Itinerary from Bordeaux to Jerusalem. He was at Jerusalem 2 years before the Holy Sepulchre was completed and dedicated. But previous to this time, pilgrimages had become very common. About AD 380, Porphyry, a Greek monk, visited the Holy Land and became Bishop of Goga. June 385, Paulina and her daughter left Rome. for Palestine and settled at Bethlehem till her death. About AD 16, Antonius made a visit to the Holy Land, but the 9 following travellers left most instructive accounts. Arculf, about AD 700, Willie Bold, 721-27, Bernard the Wise, 867, Say Wolf, 1102-3, Sigurd the Crusader, 1107-11, Rabbi Benjamin, 1160-73, John Mandeville, 1326-56, Bertrandon, 1432, Henry Moundrell, 1967. The uniformity of the descriptions is remarkable. There is of course a marked difference in their powers of observation, but what each one sees agrees with the testimony of the rest. So, possibly established fact, in a sense, right? The small and mountainous country that, under the name of Palestine, has occupied such a space as the theatre of the most momentous events in the world's history, as a strip of territory, if we accept the ancient termini of Dan and Beersheba, 131 American miles in length, with an average width of 40. The area, therefore, 5,560 square miles, approximates it to the state of Connecticut, which has 4,730. The Great Sea, Mediterranean, on the west, and the enormous trench of the Jordan Valley on the east, enclose the Holy Land as natural barriers on the sides. The deserts of Arabia on the south, through which the 40 years migration of the Israelites occurred, make a defence equally formidable upon that end, so that the only approach to invading armies in the early history of the East was from the north. And the map of Palestine, page 19, may be referred to there, or here. This is that chosen possession, that goodly land which Moses so longed to visit. This is that portion of the earth which Jehovah sware unto the fathers, that region that floweth with milk and honey, Deuteronomy 31:20. It was this that was promised by God to El Khalil, the Arabic name of Abraham, signifying the faithful man. And as a father, dividing his possessions, gives the favourite child a goodly inheritance. So the father of mankind chose for his well-beloved one of the most fertile and productive portions of the earth, a country impregnable by nature as a natural mountain fastness against an enemy, yet possessing such extraordinary variety of level as to produce almost every fruit and grain coveted by man. The commendation of Moses was not overcharged when he described it to his people as a good land, a land of brooks, of waters, of fountains, and depths that sprung out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, and vines and fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it. Deuteronomy 8:7-9. Into this romantic and fertile tract, small, compact, easily remembered, easily defended, possessing everything to intensify these sentiments, or those sentiments of patriotism common to mountaineers, into the land of Canaan, then but scarcely inhabited, came the Oriental Emir, or Prince, Abraham, nearly 40 centuries ago. Down, southwest and by the caravan road he came, for roads in the east are landmarks, and never changed. At the gates of Damascus he halted, for Damascus is a landmark in Syria from the remotest ages, a necessity of the country. Around the back of Mount Hermon, snow-crowned then as now, fording the Jordan, cool and noisy then as now, at the place so famous 700 years ago under the name of Jacob's Bridge, winding across by the horns of Hattin, which should witness such calamities, AD 1187. 3,000 years later, and the Sea of Galilee, then as now, teeming with food, the patriarch made his first halt in the beautiful valley of Shechem, between Ebal and Gerizim, to which his descendants shall return in such array 470 years afterwards. Joshua 8:30-35. There builded Abraham an altar unto the Lord which appeared unto him, Genesis 12:7. To follow him further to Bethel, to Egypt, to Hebron, and to Beersheba needs but the aid of our map, the author's map as seen on page 19. The peaceful life of Isaac is distinctly read upon that map. So is that of Jacob, whether we study his life as a petted son, a fugitive, a wealthy sheik, an unhappy parent, or finally an immigrant to Egypt. The wanderings of the tribes under Moses, BC 1419 to 1450, and the conquest of Canaan under Joshua the following year need no further reference here. The partition of the land of Canaan at Shiloh, BC 1444, distributed those cities, afterwards most famous in the history of the Crusades, among the following tribes: Bethlehem to Judah, Ascalon and Gaza to Simeon, Joppa, Ramleh and Lidada to Dan, Jerusalem jointly to Judah and Benjamin, Bethel to Benjamin, Shechem afterwards Nablus to Ephraim, Tiberias and Hatton to Zebulun, Acre and Nazareth to Asher, and Safed to Naphtali. The cities of Tyre, Sidon, Beirut and Tripoli remained in possession of the Canaanites, afterwards distinctively termed Phoenicians, from whom the Jews were never able to wrest the seacoast, or possibly pry the seacoast from them. Damascus only accepted the Jewish dominion for a short period during the reign of David. Under all the vicissitudes incident to the history of nations, the chosen race of God, held the mountain land for 16 centuries. A division occurred under Rehoboam, BC 975. First general deportation of the Jews by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, BC 588, was compensated by the permission granted them 53 years later to return from Babylon and reoccupy the land. In the time of Christ, although deprived of their political liberty by the Romans, yet the Jews were never more numerous or prosperous. In fact, that for several years that mere strip of territory defied the legions of Rome, led by their best generals, is an evidence of the number and courage of the people not to be gainsaid. The conquest and destruction of Jerusalem AD 70 by the Romans led to a second general deportation of the Jewish nation. Yet they were soon allowed to return again, for we see only 70 years later, AD 132 to 135, a revolt under Bar Kokhba, only second in interest to that which demanded the best generalship of Vespasian and Titus to overcome it. 580,000 Jews perished during the 3 years of this last insurrection, and the country was at last converted into a desert, the inhabitants either remorselessly slain or driven into exile, and divine threats, pronounced at the mouth of Moses 1600 years before, fully accomplished. It was not, however, the policy of the Romans to remain stern and intolerant. Under the milder sway of the Emperor Antonius Pius, AD 137 to 161, the Jews were restored to some of their ancient privileges and to the freedom of worship, although not permitted to rebuild their temple or to dwell in the precincts of Jerusalem. When Constantine ascended the throne, AD 312, the Jews had their seat of religious rule at Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. See map, page 19. Under his powerful patronage, as the authors have shown in the preceding chapter, splendid structures were raised by Queen Helena throughout the Holy Land in honour of the Christian faith. The country began to be overspread with memorials of Christianity. Chapels, altars, and houses of prayer marked everywhere, every spot memorable for the sayings and doings of Jesus. Jerusalem was filled with the emblems of the new faith, and crowds of pilgrims were attracted from the most distant countries by an eager desire of contemplating the place of our Redeemer's passion and of all the previous events of his holy life. Upon the death of Constantius II, AD 361, the last of the Constantine family, Julian the Apostate endeavoured during his brief reign of 3 years to restore the pagan faith. He encouraged the Jews to re-establish an order of priests who might revive the observances of the Mosaic rites. He even went so far as to collect a colony of Jews at Jerusalem. Upon the site of the temple, then many years in ruins, he laid the foundation of a new structure that should eclipse the splendour of Helena's holy sepulchre that stood on the brow of the hill a quarter of a mile west. The Jews gratefully accepted his proposals and crowded to the holy city in large numbers. They also sent liberal contributions there from all lands. And for a time, this last expiring effort of Jewish zeal promised great success. But the early death of Julian, AD 363, and the Christian zeal of his successors destroyed their hopes. The Roman policy, after this period, tended to depress the Jews in Palestine and discourage their increase. Under Khosroes, the Persians invaded Palestine, AD 614. In this invasion, they were joined by 24,000 Jews, burning with the desire of revenge and animated by the hope of recovering the promised position of which they had so long been deprived. A new and happier era of freedom and independence had been preached to them, and it really seemed as if their promised time had come. In the sack of Jerusalem, they were satiated with a full measure of revenge. 90,000 Christians perished, and the magnificent monuments of the Christian faith were mostly consumed by fire. This invasion, however, was soon checked. The Greek Emperor Heraclius, AD 627, defeated the Jews and Persians and rescued all the provinces that had been overrun and restored the sacred edifices to their former glory. The Jews were terribly punished and were then forbidden to approach within 3 miles of the holy city. The next great change was occasioned by the spread of the Mohammedan religion. The Muslim, as we have seen in a preceding chapter, having extended their doctrines and dominions by fire and sword, rapidly subdued Syria, Palestine and Egypt. In the year AD 637, the victorious Omar, having occupied the other portion of the country, sat down before Jerusalem, and after a siege of 4 months, during which his forces suffered much from the inclemency of the winter, took it by capitulation. Under his powerful sway, the so-called Mosque of Omar, Kibbut es Sakhra, or Dome of the Rock, was erected upon the site of Solomon's temple, an edifice which still stands, giving evidences of antiquity after a history of 1,250 years. AD 868, Jerusalem was conquered by the Turks under Ahmed. So we say again, go and watch Roy Kashigandra's Rise of Islam and compare it. Compare his telling of that history of Omar visiting Jerusalem and creating this Dome of the Rock and why he did it. Jerusalem was conquered by the Turks under Ahmed. The Saracens retook it, AD 906. Again, the Turks under Muhammad Iqskin, AD 978, gained possession of the prize. It was captured by Ortok, and in AD 1076 by Maleshka, a Turk, retaken by the Ortokides, or Otokides. Finally, the Fatimids. It came again into Christian hands at the storming by the Crusaders, July AD 1099. From even this brief sketch, it is easy to comprehend why of all countries in the world, Palestine is preeminently the land of pilgrimage. To the Jew, it is the home of all his prophets, priests and kings. Nor can he ever renew his system of rites and ceremonies, or ever again eat his Passover lamb until his altar is erected on Mount Moriah. To the Christian, it bears the same sacred relationship as to the Jew, with additions. For there lived and died Jesus, his Saviour. Thence went forth the word of his testimony. All places hallowed to a Christian's memory are in Palestine, or that they consider holy. Okay, in their mind. To the Muslim, it bears the same relationship as to Jew and Christians, with the addition afforded by his sacred legions of Muhammad and his flight to heaven from Jerusalem on that mysterious bird, etc. He hopped on and he went there with Moses and Jesus apparently, and they flew into Mecca or something like that. Muhammadan's flight to heaven from Jerusalem. To the historian, the student of Oriental manners, the student of religious cults, the tourist to every class of travellers, in fact, except those given to commercial interests, Palestine is preeminently the land of pilgrimage.